There is a powder sitting in your kitchen cupboard right now that will clear a stone path of weeds for an entire season. It costs less than the price of a newspaper, and it has been doing this work in English gardens since before anyone had heard of a garden center. I grew up in the Yorkshire Dales, in a stone cottage with no telephone, and for the first years of my life, no mains electricity either. My grandfather kept the vegetable garden that fed our family through every winter, and he kept it without a single bottle of shop-bought weed killer. I was put to work in that garden before I was tall enough to see over the cabbages, and what I learned there was not from a book. It was from watching an old man do the same handful of things in the same order at the same time of year for as long as I can remember. He did not call it a method. He simply called it the way things were done, and it worked every single year without fail. My grandfather had learned it from his own father, who kept a cottage garden through the years of rationing, when a wasted vegetable was not a small thing. During those years, a family's plot was often the difference between a thin winter and a proper one, and nobody had the luxury of losing beds to weeds while waiting for a shop to restock. The methods used then were not written down in any pamphlet, they were simply passed, from one pair of hands to the next, at the edge of a garden bed, the way I am passing this to you now. I am telling you this now because fewer and fewer people still know it, and I think that is a shame worth putting right. Somewhere along the way, keeping a garden clean became something you were told to buy your way out of. The shelves filled up with sprays and concentrates, each one promising to do what a handful of cheap kitchen ingredients had already been doing for generations. Nobody sat down and told the country that these older, simpler answers still worked, because there was no profit in that conversation. I am not going to dwell on that, because it is not really the point of what I want to share with you today, but it is worth knowing as we go along. What I am about to walk you through is not a theory, and it is not something I read once and decided to repeat. This was tested across hundreds of winters and hundreds of growing seasons by people who had no other choice but to make it work. They did not have the option of ringing up a company and having a van turn up with a solution in a plastic bottle. They worked it out, they refined it, and they passed it down, and it still works exactly as well today as it did then. Let us begin with why the weeds keep coming back in the first place, because understanding that changes how you fight them. A single square yard of ordinary garden soil can hold several thousand weed seeds, and many of those seeds can sit there patiently for 15 or 20 years. They are waiting for nothing more than a bit of light and a bit of moisture, and the moment you disturb the soil, you hand them exactly that. This is why pulling weeds by hand so often feels like losing, because for every one you lift out, the ground beneath is holding hundreds more in reserve. My grandfather understood this long before anyone had put a scientific name to it, and it is why his approach was never just about killing what was already growing. Keep that thought in mind, because it becomes important later when we talk about what to do after the weeds are gone, not just how to remove them. Victorian kitchen gardeners, the ones who kept the great houses fed, understood this seed bank better than most of us do today, even without the science to explain it. Their head gardeners kept meticulous records, turning beds at particular times, hoeing shallow rather than deep. All so they would not wake seeds that had been lying dormant and undisturbed. It was slow, patient work, built around the idea that you manage the ground rather than fought it, and that patience is something worth remembering as we go on. Now, before I give you the method itself, it is worth being honest about the things that do not work, because I expect you have tried most of them. Plain vinegar poured on a weed will scorch the leaf you can see, and within a week or 10 days, the very same plant is back, green and unbothered. This is because vinegar only touches the surface of the plant, and the root sitting safely below the soil is never troubled by it at all. Salt will certainly kill a weed, there is no argument there, but it kills everything else around it too, and it can sit in the soil for years afterward. My grandfather used to say that salting a bed was not weeding, it was surrendering the ground entirely, and he was not wrong. Boiling water has its place on a single weed poking through a paving crack, but try it across a whole bed and you will need more kettles than any kitchen owns. And of course, there are the stronger, shop-bought sprays, the ones with long chemical names on the label, which do the job quickly but come at a cost that is not always written on the bottle. There has been a good deal of research in recent years into what those stronger products do to the life within the soil, the fungi and the microorganisms that a healthy garden depends on, Kill the weed with something that strong, and you are very often killing a good part of the soil along with it, which is a poor trade for a clean-looking bed. My grandfather never had access to those products in his early years, and by the time they became common, he saw no reason to change a method that had never once let him down. So we are left with the same problem country people have always faced, which is how to reach the root, not just the leaf. Without poisoning the ground in the process, that brings us to the method itself. And this is where I want you to pay close attention, because the way it is mixed matters just as much as what goes into it. The base of it is bicarbonate of soda, the same tin you likely have in the baking cupboard, used for loaves and puddings for 100 years or more. You will want about 7 ounces of it, which is close enough to 1 full standard box from the shop, dissolved into a liter of hot water. The water wants to be hot to the touch, but not boiling, somewhere in the region of 60 to 70 degrees, because boiling water can break down the bicarbonate before it ever reaches the plant. Once that is dissolved through properly, you add a tablespoon of ordinary washing up liquid. Whatever sits by your kitchen sink, the brand makes no difference at all. And then, and this is the part most people leave out entirely, 2 tablespoons of plain vinegar, the kind used for pickling and salads, nothing stronger. Stir that through gently, and in well under a minute you have a liter of solution that will treat a good 10 to 15 square yards of ground. Keep watching, because the reason this particular combination works, rather than any one part on its own, is where most people are genuinely surprised. Each of these 3 ingredients is doing a different job, and it is only when they work together that the weed has no way of surviving. The bicarbonate of soda raises the surface of the leaf to a sharply alkaline state, and most common weeds, your dandelions, your bindweed, your ground elder, prefer things slightly acidic. Beyond that, the sodium in the bicarbonate begins pulling moisture straight out of the plant's own cells, so the weed is drying from the inside as it happens. Now, a weed's leaf is covered in a thin, waxy layer, put there by nature to stop it losing water and to keep things like this solution from getting in. This is where the vinegar earns its place, because it is not there to burn the leaf on its own. It is there to break down that waxy coating and open the door. Once that door is open, the bicarbonate can travel through to where it actually matters, rather than sitting uselessly on the surface, the way plain vinegar does alone, and the washing up liquid finishes the job by taking away the surface tension of the water. So the solution spreads flat across the whole leaf instead of beating up and rolling off onto the soil. Picture 3 separate blows landing on the same spot, one after another, each one opening the way for the next, and the plant has no answer to all 3 at once. That is the whole secret, and it costs a few pence a liter to make, against what a garden center would charge you for a bottle with a picture on the front. Now let me tell you exactly how to use it, because where and how you apply it changes everything. And this next part is the most important step of all. Fill a simple hand sprayer, the sort you would use for cleaning windows, and choose a dry evening, ideally with no rain forecast for a full day afterward. My grandfather was strict about timing, more strict about that than almost anything else in the garden, and it took me some years to understand why. Evening is best because the midday sun dries the solution too quickly for it to be absorbed, and morning dew on the leaf will only water it down before it starts working. Between those 2 points sits a quiet stretch of a few hours where the leaf is dry. The air has cooled, and the solution is given the whole night undisturbed to do its work. He used to watch the sky the way some men watch the clock, and he would delay a treatment by a day, rather than rush it into whether that was working against him. That kind of patience does not come naturally to most of us now, but it is worth remembering that the old methods were built around working with the weather, not against it. For a dandelion, aim the stream directly into the center of the rosette, the point where all the leaves gather, because from there it runs straight down to the root collar. A dandelion's root can run as deep as 1.5 feet, and if you only burn the leaf, a new plant grows straight back from what is left below ground. Soak the leaves properly, right to the point of dripping, and leave it to work overnight while the garden is still. For ground elder, spray the leaves, but also treat the soil directly around the base of the plant, because the hot water in the mixture helps carry the bicarbonate down to the shallow underground stems that spread it so quickly. One treatment will weaken it considerably, but ground elder is stubborn, and I would expect to repeat the treatment after a week, sometimes twice more, before it gives up entirely. Bindweed is the toughest of the lot, with roots that can run down as far as 6 feet, So here you are, relying on the plant itself to carry the solution downward through its leaves. Spray as many leaves as you can reach, because bindweed absorbs through the leaf and transports it into the root system on its own, which country folk always called drawing it down. Expect to treat bindweed weekly for 3 or 4 weeks and watch the leaves yellow and the stems weaken a little more with every application until it stops growing altogether. Give it a few days after any of these treatments before you judge the result, because unlike a shop-bought weed killer, this one works over days rather than hours. Now, if you are working an allotment rather than a small garden, a hand sprayer will not carry you far enough, and you will want to scale the whole recipe up. The proportions stay exactly the same, only the quantity changes. So for 5 liters of water, you would use a little over 2 pounds of bicarbonate, 5 tablespoons of washing up liquid, and 10 tablespoons of vinegar. A pump sprayer, the kind worn on the back with a shoulder strap, will see you through a full allotment plot in an afternoon. And it is a tool worth owning if you keep any real amount of ground. There is one more use for this mixture that surprises people every time I mention it, and that is moss, on paving, on walls, even on a shaded roof. Spray the moss generously, leave it a day or 2 to do its work, and then simply sweep it away with a stiff broom, because it will lift clean off the surface on its own. By the 3rd day, you will see the edges of the leaves turning yellow and beginning to curl, which is the plant losing water it cannot replace. By the 7th day, most weeds will be dry and brittle enough to crumble between your fingers, root included, which is the part no surface treatment can ever manage. Now, there are places this solution must never go. And I want to be plain about that, because a tool used carelessly can do harm as easily as good. It does not know the difference between a weed and a vegetable, so keep it well away from your vegetable beds and pull weeds there by hand instead. Keep it off the lawn, because it will leave a brown patch behind, killing the grass along with whatever weeds sat among it. Near ponds, streams, or a well, leave it be entirely, since in any real quantity it can shift the balance of the water and harm the life within it. And never spray a wet leaf, whether from rain or morning dew, because the water sitting on the surface simply dilutes the solution before it has a chance to work. There are a few questions I am asked so often about this that I want to answer them plainly before we go any further. Is it safe around children and pets? People ask. And the honest answer is that bicarbonate of soda is something you might find in a loaf of bread. So a stray splash on skin or fur is nothing to worry over. Compare that to the gloves and the caution you are told to use with a stronger chemical spray, and you begin to see why country households never thought twice about keeping this in the kitchen. Does the solution keep? People also ask, and it does not really. Because the bicarbonate begins losing its strength once mixed, so make it fresh each time you plan to use it. Will it work in any season? And the truthful answer is that it works best in spring and early summer, when the weed is growing hard and its cells are full of water and ready to draw the solution in. Come autumn, most weeds are already slowing down on their own, and while the treatment will still have some effect, you are working against the plant's natural rhythm rather than with it. Before we move on to keeping the garden clear for good, it is worth clearing up a couple of things people often get wrong about weeds themselves. Not every plant we call a weed deserves the name entirely, since dandelion leaves can be eaten in a salad, and a good deal of country wine and honey has been made from them over the years. Nettles, left to grow in a corner rather than throughout the beds, make one of the finest liquid feeds a garden can have, steeped in a bucket of water for a fortnight. The other thing worth saying plainly is that having weed seeds in your soil does not mean you are doomed to fight them forever, because a covered bed simply will not give those seeds the light they are waiting for. But killing what is already there is only half of what my grandfather taught, and the second half is what kept his garden clear for the whole season, not just a fortnight. This is the part that most people never learn, and it is the reason some gardens stay clean all summer while others are back to square one within a month. Once the dead weeds have been cleared away, and they will lift out easily by then, the ground must be covered, because bare soil is simply an invitation. For paths and the cracks between paving stones, work in a mixture of sand and bicarbonate of soda. 10 parts sand to 1 part bicarbonate packed down into the gaps. That mixture keeps seeds from taking hold at all, and a single application, refreshed once a year, will keep a path clear for the whole season. For flower beds, a layer of bark, laid 3 or 4 inches thick, will block the light that weed seeds need to sprout, and it will last a good 2 years before needing to be topped up. For the vegetable garden, straw or grass clippings do the same job without changing the soil in a way your vegetables would not care for. Laid a couple of inches deep around the plants, this covering does 2 things at once. It starves the seeds of light, and it keeps moisture in the ground so you are watering less as well as weeding less. There is one further trick worth knowing, and it comes from the same generation that could not afford to waste anything, including the ash left over from the fire. Wood ash, spread thinly along a path edge or worked lightly into the top of a mulch, raises the alkalinity of the soil surface in much the same way the bicarbonate does, and it costs nothing at all if you already burn logs through the winter. It is not a replacement for the main treatment, but as a finishing touch after the mulch is down. It adds one more layer of discouragement to any seed still waiting its turn. Do the whole job once, perhaps twice in a season, spraying in early spring, clearing the dead growth a week later, then laying the covering down, and the work for the year is largely done. Think for a moment about what that actually means for your time. Because a gardener who weeds by hand every weekend from spring through to autumn can easily spend 40 or more hours a year on the task alone. Do the job this way instead. And you are looking at perhaps 3 or 4 hours across the whole season, spring treatment, a follow-up here and there, and the rest of your time is your own again. That is not a small difference, and it is exactly the kind of difference my grandfather would have understood without needing a single figure to prove it to him. My grandfather used to compare it to how his own mother kept the house, saying, "You can sweep a floor every day forever, or you can give it a proper clean once and simply maintain it afterward." He was a man of few words, but that one has stayed with me for 60 years. Because it is as true of a garden as it is of anything else. I think about why this knowledge sat quiet for so long, and I do not believe it was ever truly lost, only set aside while something more expensive took its place. There is a particular comfort in knowing you do not need to depend on anyone else for a clean garden, that the answer was in the cupboard the whole time. It is not a grand thing, this bicarbonate and vinegar and a drop of soap, but it does exactly what it needs to do, and it asks nothing of you but a little patience. I find there is something worth holding on to in that, in the idea that the old ways were not primitive. They were simply careful, and careful things tend to last. I still keep a garden of my own, now up on the edge of the dales, where the wind comes in off the moor. And I still mix this same solution in the same old watering can my grandfather used. There is a kind of quiet in doing a thing the way it has always been done, in knowing that the hands before yours solved the very same problem you are facing and left you the answer if only you would look for it. I did not learn this from a shop or from a leaflet handed out at a garden show. I learned it standing beside an old man in Wellington boots who had no patience for anything that did not earn its place. He would have found it strange, I think, that anyone needed telling this at all, since to him it was simply how a garden was kept, the same as bread was baked or a fire was laid. But the world has moved a good deal faster than these old habits, and it is easy for something quiet and unadvertised to be set aside in favor of whatever is sold the loudest. That is really all I am doing here, setting these old habits back down where people can find them again, one at a time. There is no trick to any of it, no secret ingredient hidden behind a paywall, just a recipe worth writing down and a bit of patience while it does its work. If you take nothing else from this, take the bicarbonate, the vinegar, and the soap, mixed fresh, sprayed in the evening, and given the time it needs. If this has been useful to you, there are more methods where this one came from. I share a new one every day. The old ways are still here. You just have to know where to look.